My TV 53 News at 8:30 is digging deeper right now.
Well, very good evening. Welcome to the San Joaquin Valley's only 8:30 News. I'm Austin Reed. Thank you for joining us. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at My TV 53. During the 8:30 half hour of My TV 53 News, we dig deeper and we introduce you to some of the biggest newsmakers in the Central Valley and beyond. And I say beyond because my guest today, joining us via Zoom, is Alex Bennett, coming to us from Joliet, Illinois. Did I say that right? Joliet.
You said it right, Joliet. That's correct.
Alex, thank you for joining us here on the news at 8:30. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So tell me a little bit about, you've got a very fascinating writer's story. So I want to start from the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about why you got into the world of becoming an author.
Well, to be honest with you, I've been a bartender pretty much all my life. I've worked in restaurants. And, I always wanted to write a book. And, I went back to school. I got certified to teach English. That was 2010. The housing market had collapsed. I was one of 1,200 people applying for a job. And my boss at the time would say, hey, man, you're good at this. If you want to keep doing it, you can keep doing it. So I continued to bartend, but the idea was there, and having learned how to teach people how to write, I thought I better apply my knowledge to myself. And then, when it comes to writing books, the inspiration just sort of hits you. And when the inspiration hit for me to write this book, I sat down and got at it. And it's been about a 10-year journey from the time I first started writing to getting this first book published.
All right. And the book is Next to You. This is a series, right?
It's a trilogy. Yeah. It's the Old Rosie Chronicles. The first book is titled A Shot of Okies.
Okay. And so, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, in it, I play with the history of whiskey. For those of you that don't know, whiskey's been around for about 1,000 years in Britain. Whiskey's grain alcohol. Barley's the native grain to Britain, and that's why the Scots and the Irish started making whiskey out of barley way back when. Now, during the age of exploration, everywhere they went, they'd find a native grain, they'd start making whiskey out of it. So when they got to America, corn's native to America, they start making whiskey out of corn, and that was the first step in making bourbon. Now, the second step came about when, at the time, everything was shipped in wooden barrels, but that was only so one man could roll it. It had nothing to do with the aging process because they didn't age it because you couldn't trust water. So if you had a little alcohol to it, now it's going to be safe to drink. And so as a result, if you had a pine barrel, you'd fill that up and you'd send it on its way. You can imagine how it might affect the taste, but they just kind of dealt with it, But then they get to America and they start making barrels out of white American oak. And then they fill those up and send them on their way. And everybody's like, wow, man, this is great. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. So that was the second step in making bourbon. And then the third step came about when you had your white American oak barrel. And it was filled with pickles or herring or crabs or something to that effect. You can imagine how that might affect the taste. So they started charring out the inside to get rid of the lingering flavors and odors and realized, wow, we got something here. And so that's kind of how bourbon came about. Now, it's a very murky history. They say it's 1785, but by that point, it was already a thing. You'd come up with the corn, I came up with the barrel, somebody else came up with charring it out, and we all kind of compared notes. So as a result, I can play with it. I go back to 1743. At the time, it's the last true Scottish rebellion against the English. That was a small part of a much larger war. And I have a young Scotswoman in America who wants to make whiskey. So she's kind of stumbling on the process of making bourbon. And at the same time, there's an Irish pirate. And every time she hears about an English ship that has a barrel of her Okies aboard, she seizes it, she accuses the captain of smuggling, and she executes him. And you know how guys are. The more dangerous something is, the more we're going to want it. So as her legend grows, the legend of Okies grows. But that's when I start getting into the second and third book.
This must have taken would you say that because you are a bartender, this really spoke to you, this whole story?
Oh, yeah. I always tell everybody, be careful if you're sitting at my bar, because there's a good chance you're going to be a character in the book, And some of the regulars in the book are regulars that I've had in the past. Some of the characters, some of the stories are based on real stories that I've either been involved in or been told. And the interaction, I always tell people when they tell me they want to write a book to, write what you know. And while I'm not a big sailing ship sort of person, I have spent a lot of time in a bar and I do know how people interact. And so, there is a lot of scenes where there's people in restaurants and public houses and that sort of thing. And I feel right at home writing those sorts of chapters.
And how long have you been a bartender? I think you had mentioned before. How long now?
So I've been in restaurants for over 35 years. I've been bartending exclusively for about 15.
The stories, the people that you meet, to showcase them in this light, how fun is that for not only you, but then maybe some of your customers that they'll pick up the book?
Oh, one of my oldest regulars was this guy named Rags, and he is Rags in the book. I even use his name. Now, he was a World War II vet. He died about 5-6 years ago. But when I told him he was gonna be in the book, at the time he was like 92 or 93, and it truly made his day. I mean, it probably made his year. In a lot of ways, it may have made his life, because he was truly honored, and he was a great guy. He was a good friend of mine. I miss him now, but there are people who have read the book who knew him and who have said to me, "Wow, man, I really had a hard time getting through it," because they miss him, and it really brings them to life. And so, and there's other guys like that play other pieces in it. Some of the ladies in the book are definitely parts of my life. And, I think everybody kind of has a good time with it and thinks it's fun. A lot of people don't realize, as an author, I think a lot of characters that we've read in history have come from people's lives. Hemingway was notorious for it. So I think it's what adds a little real to the whole thing.
So for what's your demographic? Who would really like this series?
Well, I say, the statistics say that I think 70% of the readers are women, and having both a woman hero and a woman villain, I think, appeals to both. And the feedback I've got from people who have read it have said, yeah, man, I love your pirate, or I love Mary, the Scotswoman who makes the whiskey. But also anybody who's really into bourbon, into the history, into pirates. I delve pretty deep into the history of pirates. There's some famous ones out there that I kind of give the background behind them and kind of, bring them into the story. I always say, what do we talk about at a bar? We talk about sports. We'll talk about actors, actresses. Well, back in those days, they talked about pirates. Those were the famous people. So if you were sitting in one of my bars in 1743, you're going to talk about Anne Bonny, or you're going to talk about Mary Read, or even Grace O'Malley. And so anybody that would be interested in those sorts of historical characters, I try to provide a little background to that as well.
And for 1743, this is also, a time of change in the world, right?
Oh yeah. The whole world was at war. The French were actually supporting the Scots at this time to kind of stick it to the English. But it kind of, the winners, and they write the history, so to speak. But it does kind of change the landscape of Europe in a lot of ways, in terms of who was allied with whom, and how the succession of kings went about. And I do try to get into some of that as well. It's writing historical fiction. You really gotta know not just the day-to-day life, but you'd have to see the bigger picture. You have to know the kings. You have to know the successions. You have to know what caused a lot of the battles back in the day.
One thing that really has attracted me is the art. Let's talk a little bit about that.
This is the best money I've ever spent on myself. I actually, there's a story to the cover. And being a bartender, I know 1,000 artists. I thought it was going to be easy, but I wanted one of these original sort of 80s painted style. And this is a very specific style. And most of the people I know are younger, and they didn't know how to do it. But long story short, somebody had told me the style I'm looking for. I was scrolling through Instagram, found a portrait of this lady who I thought, man, that is my pirate. And then a little while later, I found another painting that was done. That was a book cover from the 80s. And the gentleman who did them both was Stephen Gardner. And, I say kind of the universe kind of lines up for it, because to find both of these posts from the same person after scrolling through 1,000 of them, so I reached out to him. We went back and forth. He gave me his price, and it was a little more than I expected, but it's the cover. And if you're going to spend money on anything, you spend it on the cover. And he was a true professional. I mean, when I say to you, every step of the way, we worked together. And at the end, I could not be happier with the way it came out than the way it did.
Yeah, that is not created by artificial intelligence.
No, not at all. Not at all. You know,
we've got about a minute left. What's next? How can people follow you? Let's wrap it up.
So I have a Facebook page. It's called Literary Booze. It's on Facebook and Instagram. You can follow me there. I try to post some dramatic readings and some of the interesting things that I learned doing the research for the book. The next step is I'm working on the second book right now. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it, trying to get it ready for the publisher. I should have that out by March of next year. And then, you know, I'm still working away in the bar. So I say, if you're ever in the Chicagoland area, you reach out to me. I'll tell you where I'm working. I'll tell you what my schedule is. You can come down. I'll be happy to make you an old fashioned or a Manhattan or a martini or whatever else you like to drink.
All right. You heard it first from Alex Bennett. Yeah, you know, we were talking before the interview today. My mom's from the Chicago area, so you may see me one day.
Awesome. I hope so.
Alex, thank you for your time. I'm Austin Reed. This is My TV 53 News. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And we're digging deeper with more guests coming up in just a bit. Don't go anywhere. Thanks, Alex.
This is My TV 53 News.